Hello everyone. Today we're going to be looking at uh, the Dutch defense according um, to Ivan Sokolov. Well, actually, we are looking at Ivan Sokolov versus the Dutch defense. Ivan Sokolov is a very strong grandmaster, and today we're going to look at how he deals with the Dutch defense. So coming from the white side. And again, this is not a theoretical video, but we are looking at one particular grandmaster's um, approach when fighting against the Dutch defense. So we will be looking at this player, uh, what his particular solution is, and I find that very useful at times, and you might too. That sometimes when you're having trouble with a particular opening or an opening is annoying, sometimes you can find what they call a chess hero and follow that person's repertoire against it. So here we go. Again, we're not being biased here. We look at wins, losses, and whatever, wherever the final verdict stands, it stands. Okay, and we're not gonna get real deep, but just light, just light comments, because the games pretty much speak for themselves. Now, first thing I want to say, this first game here is the under 20 World Championship. 1987, Ivan Sokolov has white and was 25-25 at the time. It was playing FIDE master Richard Westman, and the game started off as you can see here, d4 f5 and knight c3. And this particular player's repertoire against the Dutch um, fits those players who like to play, offbeat systems versus the Dutch. In other words, they don't want to go into the g3, c4, knight f3, bishop g2, castle lines, the main lines. This is something that Sokolov has been playing since 1987 with a few exceptions. So let's check it out. So knight c3, black plays d5, which is um, the basic the main line move against knight c3. And the idea is that you can basically get like a better um, variation of the Stonewall at times, because this knight on c3 inhibits the movement of the c pawn, which is normally used to attack um, this pawn complex. So here he plays bishop g5, knight f6, bishop takes e6, f6, e takes f6, and now it looks like we've transposed into Trompovsky. e3, c6, queen f3, and we can already see the basic idea in this position, which is to attack the black weakness on f5 here. So queen f3, and soon bishop d3 will follow. Bishop e6, bishop d3, g6, protecting the pawn. And now, since g6 has been played, further weakness has been created in the black pawn structure on the king side, and white's strategy is to continue to probe on the king side, annoy those pawns, and create further weakness in the position. Also, it's difficult for black to castle on that side. Another interesting feature is that although black has the bishop pair, the structure is more conducive to knights at this point because of the blocked and closed nature of the position. So h4, h5. So we can see the restrictive nature of white's play against black's kingside pawns. Okay, castle, queen side, and we see Sokolov's play is very, very simple and direct. Knight d7, king b1, just simply getting the king, basically completing castling. They usually say your castle on the queen side is not complete till you move your king over that extra square, and then a lot of times and oftentimes play a3. Queen a5. Black has the right idea, attacking on the queen side where the king is. Knight ge2, completing its development, and black also castles on the queen side where it's a bit safer. Knight c1, and here Sokolov plans to harass the queen on a5 with knight b3, and also transfer the other knight to the f4 square. Remember, White's original idea, attacking the weaknesses on the king side, and that still remains in effect. Bishop d6. So now we see knight 3 e2, king b8. There's g3, because the knight is planning on going to f4. King a8, knight b3, harassing the queen. Queen c7, and now knight f4, attacking the g6 pawn. Bishop f7. Notice again black's bishop's bogged down in a swamp, so to speak, of pawns. Queen e2. Knight b6. Knight d2. Rook e8. Rook c1. And now we see the build up for c4 here. Black decides to play c5. Now this is a committal move because now he takes on additional weakness after d takes c5 here. Now we can see the isolated pawn on the d file. c3 is keeping it from advancing. Bishop d6, and now we'll see a build up on the d file. Rook hd1, knight c4. Sokolov plays bishop c2. Bishop takes f4, d takes f4, d4. A little bit of tactics here. Exploiting the pin of the queen. Sokolov plays c takes d4. But now what happens, okay, after rook takes d4 is we have this pin, this queen. We see the rook here in opposition to this queen. So now the bishop simply moves back to d3. This forces b5, and we can say here that black definitely stands worse. Too many weaknesses in the position. So knight takes, b takes, and now Sokolov plays an awesome move. He just snatches off the rook here. Now he could have played maybe a bit stronger as this queen c2, maintaining the pin here on the queen. And play could have went rook d6, for example, bishop e2, rook takes, queen c6, queen d2, and rook b8. And again, white is just superior here in this position. Pawn structure is better. Black doesn't have any attack at all. And again, these pawns are all weak on the queen side and king side for that matter. But here Sokolov played e takes d4 and gives up the queen, and this gives black some counter chances here. Bishop takes e2, bishop d5, and so this, to me, this was like entering into unnecessary complications. Bishop takes c4, b takes c4, again the pin, the theme of the pin again. And now white begins to reestablish control with the two rooks versus the queen, and that passed pawn is a problem. And at this point, Um, Black is pretty much lost. There's no way to stop that pawn. So black resigned. So there you have it. Knight c3, d5, and bishop g5. This system, and it's pretty simple. And White's idea is real primitive. Just basically knight c3, get the bishop out. Sometimes the bishop goes to f4. Um, Sometimes it goes to g5, but basically develop your queen side. The queen on d2, and then castle queen side, and attack. That's as simple as that. Let's look at the next game. You'll get the feel for what he's doing. This game is in 1989. Again, Sokolov with the white pieces, um, playing another Russian master, Mikhail Saitlin. And again, knight c3, d5, bishop g5. Saitlin plays c6, e3, queen b6, trying to probe the white queen side. And that's one of the lines you'll see when the bishop comes out early like that, is players will play c6, queen b6 to basically ask the question of white of how you're going to defend the queen side. Sokolov just chose to ignore it and play bishop d3, queen takes b2, and knight ge2, and basically sacrificing a pawn for the initiative. Notice the tremendous lead in development that white possesses, and in exchange black has a pawn on b2. Black's argument is that the position is closed and that the lead in development will not amount to much, and that black will just be up a pawn in a few moves. Knight f6, f3. Okay, keep in mind this plan, f3, with the obvious idea of busting through the center with e4. Remember, white has just sacrificed the pawn on b2, and to make his lead in development count, he must open the position. Black, of course, strives to keep it closed until he can catch up in development. So understand these principles. So f3, g6, e4, d takes, f takes, knight takes, knight bd7. Again, we see black trying to get itself together in his development. Bishop g7. And now knight e4 to g3. Castle. Bishop c4. King h8. Now queen d3. The queen gets out of dodge before bishop b3 traps the queen. Gets the queen not trapped, but keeps the queen would have to go to a3 to get out. King h1. And now black strikes in the center with e5. c3. E takes d4, c takes d4, and knight d5. So now, looking at this position, we can see that black has done a good job as far as consolidating his position, and he's up a pawn right now. Bishop takes, c takes, queen a3, king g8, knight f4, offering the trade of queens, queen e3, knight b6. Sokolov tries to solve problems tactically. G takes h5, rook takes f8, bishop takes f8, bishop f6. It looks like he's going to mate the white king, but hold on. Black plays h6, keeping the queen off g5. Knight takes h5, Planning on going to g3 with the queen now, but bishop f5, queen g3, king h7, bishop e7, knight d7, bishop takes, and now queen g6, forcing trades, and black is just up a piece, and Sokolov resigned. So far, we have 1-1 with this system here. Just some brief comments here. I do like the opening here for white. Definitely has compensation for the pawn, and we could say without deep analysis that Sokolov basically misplayed the position here. Not that black was lost, but that white probably shouldn't have lost after e4 d takes, in this continuation here. White definitely had compensation for the pawn. Perhaps instead of moving this knight again, instead of playing that move, to g3, maybe perhaps moving the knight to d2 may be better, because we understand you don't want to trade pieces here, but maybe moving the knight to d2 is a little better instead of g3. So for example, knight d2, knight b6, knight b3. Of course, the idea is to play bishop c1, so this forces the tempo out of black, and then hopping in c5 squared. So this game is double edged, but I think it's a good healthy position for white in that he has full compensation for the pawn. Now we fast forward to 1994. This is Sokolov. Is rated 2610 at this time versus a player named Gerardo Barbero, who was 2520. So again, d4, f5, knight c3, d5, and this time instead of the move bishop g5 that we saw in the first two games, we see the move f3, which is very direct, with the idea of blasting open the center with e4. And now, only after the knight commits itself, do we see the move bishop g5. So e6 and e4, bishop e7, right? Not making any trades in the center. And it's understandable because, for example, with this pin, if he were to start trading in the center here, I mean, black has not lost here, but why start out the game with this, this isolated pawn right here? This is a real simple position for white to easily, just pile the pressure on the e pawn. This is why black chose to play bishop e7. h6 is possible also, just asking the bishop to declare its intentions. Bishop e7 was played, e5, and now knight of d7. This position is blocked up now. Some similarities to a French. It's interesting because, like, here I think this is good for white, because white's bad bishop is his dark squared bishop, and black's good bishop is his dark squared bishop. So I think this is a plus for white that he gets to trade these bishops. And now, just like in the French, we see this problem bishop right here that has to be taken care of. Sokolov simply plays f4, a6, preventing knight b5 at some point. Knight f3 in simple development by Sokolov. Again, this position is very similar to a French now. Knight e2. The idea is just to fortify the center with c3. There it is. b6. Queen d2. Again, idea is castle queenside. Bishop b7. h3. And this is one of the breaks right here. So g4. Another break for for white is c4. But of course, for obvious, well, not so obvious reasons, but to me, obvious reasons, you don't want to play c4. This because there's a lot of counterplay involved for black. So out of your two breaks, you choose this break. Castle. There it is, g4, g6, knight g3, just maintaining tension, putting a little bit more pressure in squares. King b8, and bishop e2, rook c8, and of course white's playing over there on the queen side. Black is playing on the queen side. White is playing on the king side. C takes, knight a5. This is typical French play down the c file, wanting to occupy this square right here, and b3. And I'm not gonna go through the rest of the whole game. This game ended in the draw because we're primarily concentrating, on the repertoire against the Dutch. But this just goes to show you, some of the transpositional possibilities. This is a hard-fought game, and both players played very well. And again, you can see after this particular opening that it took on a French type feel, where white had a slight space advantage, but wasn't really able to create enough weaknesses in the black position, and black created enough counterplay, opening up the c file. He just played very well, and to limit the chances that white had. So that was a good game. Next is the Moscow Olympiad, 1994. This is Ivan Sokolov again, 26-25 versus, and this game is very important because he's playing Vladimir P. Malianuk with the black pieces. For those of you that don't know, this guy is probably the best Dutch player in the world. And played the Dutch for probably like 30 years. And his games are the model. If you played Leningrad Dutch, this guy's games are the model to follow with the black pieces. So seeing Sokolov versus Malianuk is a test of Sokolov's playing the Dutch. So in this game, Sokolov played the move g3. So is it an indictment against Sokolov's knight c3 system that he didn't play his knight c3 against Sokolov? That Sokolov didn't play his knight c3 against Malianuk. Instead, he opted for the main line and played g3, knight f6, bishop g2, g6. Right, there's your Leningrad c3. So he prepared this line, and this line is it's not really a main line, but kind of a side line. C3 allows the queen to come out and put tremendous pressure on this diagonal. Also, it blunts the force of this bishop here. But in theory, black does not have that much to worry about. But theory is theory, and play is another thing. So there it is, queen b3. And as you can see, it's already difficult for castling to take place. Normally in the Leningrad, black wants to play d6 and then eventually moves like e5. So the c3 plan kind of crosses that idea up somewhat. Knight c6, knight f3, and now e6. So he's kind of playing something that he really doesn't really want to play. He doesn't want to play e6, but he wants to castle. Castle, castles, knight bd2, a5, a4. Of course, the queen wants to hang out a little bit longer there. d5. So now we had this kind of Stonewall setup here. b6, excuse me, d5, queen c2. The duty of the queen is done on b3 on that diagonal, and this is his the purpose was to get exactly this kind of setup where black kind of blockades, doesn't get into e5 advance and kind of blocks up his light squares. And now you have this bishop here that's a little suspect. e5 square is a little weak, and now white prepares for his breaks. One of them being b4, b6, b3, knight e4, and one of the ideas behind b3, of course, is to play this move. Bishop a3, rook f7, rook a d1, and now rook d7. And now this is a double-edged move. This is a Sokolov style. And b4 is played. Another idea is to play the move e3 with the idea of playing for c4. Remember, it's important to know where your breaks are in these closed positions. You have, again, there's the b4 break, which is what he played. And here's, of course, is the c4 break. There's e4 break, but of course you can see you're not getting that right now. It's very difficult to orchestrate that. You have to kick this knight out. You have to remove the knight on f3, play moves like f3 and e4 to get that break. Of course, there's g4 break also, but again, you have to gauge the difficulty in actually achieving the breaks, and also the counterplay from the opponent. So that's why I say b4 is double-edged, because b4 gives black counterplay also. With e3, bishop a6, for example, rook fe1, queen f6, and c4, with the idea of breaking here, and then you had this play on the c file, exploiting the position of this knight. And again, it's probably about equal. So b4 was played though, and now we'll see the double-edged nature. So we have c takes b4, bishop b7, e3, queen b8, and now b5. And we see kind of a similar effect with that, with the line I showed you here, with this, idea of taking here and the play on the c file. Because after b5, knight d8, you see the same idea. Play on the c file. One of the main differences, however, is this pawn right here has to be watched. It's weak. His rook is ready to take it at any moment. Bishop b2, knight f7, knight takes, d takes, and knight e5. Knight takes, d takes, queen e8, rook takes, queen d7, and rook d1. Queen e7. So the game here is pretty equal. White has some pressure on the c file. Black has pressure on the a file. Bishop f1. Bishop d5. So looks like we're just cruising on to a draw here. Bishop d4. And now rook d8. And what I do not like about rook d8 is that it takes the pressure off this pawn right here, which had to be eternally watched. So after rook d8, you know, it allows white to get rid of the weakness, right? So white gets rid of his weakness, but black keeps his. And what's black's weakness is this pawn on a c file. So watch what happens after rook d8. That allows rook a1, of course, with the obvious idea of just pushing. But Alienuk goes for this attack over here, g5, a5. So now white gets rid of his weakness. B takes a5 is forced because you don't want to have a pawn sitting on a6 protected. Now he comes back, rook a6, but now he came back too late because now um, white is taking care of his problem already, which was that a pawn. Bishop b7. This is a blunder, overlooking overlooking white's next move here, which is rook takes, a check, bishop takes, and now a killer move, b6. And you're saying, well, why not c takes b6? Well, this is what happened in the game. Queen c8, because this guy's unprotected. This drives the queen back. So the queen is forced now back, and now the e6 pawn is unprotected. So what happens is the position falls apart. So it's kind of like that old adage. I think Tara said, if one piece stands bad, the whole game stands bad. This is a good generality. In this case, the bishop on c8, excuse me, on a8 is terrible. And that allows the tactical shot b6. After c takes b6, which is forced, then queen c8. And this is all based on the bad position of the bishop on a8. Queen f8 has to go protect, but now the e6 pawn drops. King h8, check. I'm sorry, queen takes e6 check, king h8, and now b6 pawn drops. And just like that, bishop d5, e6, bishop f6, and e7, exclamation mark, and black resign. Notice that bishop is pinned. This guy is pinned, so there will be no capturing this pawn, and queen takes is threatened. Let's move on. Next game is 1996 versus Alexander Onishuk, who was just recently the coach of the U.S. team that faced the world team. So here at the time, Alexander Onishuk was 2605. He's a Dutch player also. So d4, f5, g3 again by Sokolov. Knight f6, knight h3. This has the idea often of bringing the knight to f4. This keeps the diagonal open for the bishop and exerts a lot of pressure on the light squares around the black king. We've seen the non play this several occasions. It's actually a good line to play against the Dutch. Is e5. It allows e5. And that's one of the downsides, is that knight h3 doesn't put any pressure on e5. So e5 is played, but this is part of white's system. Is white doesn't have any problem with black playing e5 early. Knight c6. Again, we see Sokolov with this fineness for the c3 setup. g6, and now d takes, knight takes, queen b3. There's the same type of playing again. And we could see now the benefits for white having this knight on h3, because the bishop is pressing down hard on this diagonal, as well as the queen. c6, knight d2, queen e7, knight f4. This prevents bishop from coming here, of course, and it's very provocative. G5. He wants to get the guy out of there, so he does it and plays bishop e6. Queen c2, bishop g7, knight b3, knight to f7, knight d4, castle, knight e1, queen d7, knight ef3, knight e4, takes the bishop, knight takes e6, queen takes e6, and queen b3, offering an endgame where white has the two bishops and the target on d6 to attack. So I'll leave this game right here. This game wind up ending up in a draw, and now we go again forward. Still in 1996, and now Sokolov is playing a very strong grandmaster, Valery Solov. Again, he chooses this line, and Solov, who was rated 2670 at the time, very strong grandmaster, played the Stonewall, castle, bishop d6, c4, and we get this mainline Stonewall from Sokolov. One of the main ideas is to trade off the dark square bishops. So b3 is not only just to play just bishop b2, but to play bishop a3, and say after bishop takes a3, then the knight comes here, then the knight comes here, the knight comes here, and then the knight comes here, and then black has this grip on the dark squares. So queen e7 is one of the moves employed to prevent bishop a3, because now black would just snatch the bishop. So you see these moves like a4. There's a good game in this line, Gary Kasparov versus Nigel Short, where the same line was employed, because Nigel Short was playing the Stonewall for a few years. So a5, reckoning the argument here with a5 is that this pawn is weak. Bishop a3, white goes on with this plan. Bishop takes a3, knight takes a3, castle, knight c2, rook d8, queen c1, getting out of the opposition, and also planning to play on the dark squares. Now that the dark square bishops are gone, white and black both use their queens to kind of replace the influence that was lost on the dark squares by their bishop, with moves like queen f4, queen e3 on prise. So queen c1, b6. What's b6 about? Well, not only fortifying the center, but this bishop is always a problem in the Stonewall. What to do with it? Do you play the Botvinnik variation and bring it on like this? This is a good idea. Of course, it's time consuming. Or you can play the idea of b6 and bishop a6. Sometimes the bishop goes here, but again, it's not really developed this kind of waiting events to transpire. Bishop a6 is a normal developing idea in the Dutch. It's a little bit faster than bishop d7 and coming all the way around here. Although once the bishop gets out here, it's probably better. Anyway, white continues on with his plan. There's knight c1, knight bd7, and knight d3, and now you can see the idea clearly. This grip on e5, bishop a6, knight f, e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook a c8, and white has some pressure, but not really enough. And there's queen e3. Notice again the queen taking the place of the dark squared bishop. Knight d7, just dealing with that annoying knight. Rook fc1, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. Notice the that Sokolov did not allow his pawn to get exchanged on e5, but he kept the piece on e5. Queen f6, again, fighting for e5, which is very important in the Dutch. Queen takes f6, g takes f6, so black gains control of e5, and at the cost of double pawns. Well, we could say here that white has slight advantage in this position. He played c5, and it's a difficult position because on b5, then you got to worry about this exchange here, and then black doesn't want to exchange here because the rook takes c5, so he must be very careful. Solov played rook b8, and e3 was played, maintaining the tension. Of course, Sokolov could just play b takes, but this gives black some counterplay also because this pawn is a little bit weak too. So it's kind of double-edged. So e3, and now if b takes e5, then rook takes e5. There's no problem parting with this pawn because you got this and this tempo against the bishop and this. So in other words, black has way more weaknesses. So after e3, rook dc8, rook a3, bishop came in with e2, f3, and although white is better here, white was not able to convert this, and this game also ended in a draw. But this is definitely better, a bit better for white. Not saying it's winning, but this is not the type of position you want as black, like to get into consistently. Okay, now this is game 45, and against one of the Norwegian grandmasters, Simon Agdestein, and we see anti-Dutch system. So it seems like at this point, Sokolov abandoned his his fling with the main line Dutch defense, or almost main line. Anyway, he was playing like c3 and stuff, and it goes back to these systems. But we have not seen knight c3. So knight f6, and normally nowadays you would just see bishop takes f6 here. The e3 is played, e6, bishop d3, bishop e7, knight e2. Again, this is like a rapid game, so castle, castle, knight d5, a3. Nothing wrong with just c4, but he doesn't want to lose the bishop on d3, so he plays a3 first to prevent knight b4. Knight just goes back, c4, b6, and the game is pretty much equal because white is not really putting enough pressure on black, so black is pretty much developing as he wants. b4, knight d8, c5, knight f7, f3, g6, queen b3, and now he gets this break, e5, bishop c4, king g7. And I'm just moving through this game quickly. C takes, a takes, because we have some more, few more games to go. So d5, and again, there's nothing really to say about this game. It's equal position. White did not really put any pressure on black's position, and now black has a decent position, and black has to be careful about the a file. h5, a4, h4, now knight d7, So A takes B6, knight takes B6, bishop B5, knight G5, and black now is starting to put together a attack on the king side, and white has no play to counterbalance on the other side of the board. So now he can just play defense. So H3, Queen F7, and a lot of pressure on this pawn right here. F4, Knight H7, E4, C6, of course exploiting the pin right here. F takes E5, D takes, Bishop D3, F4, Queen B2, and of course there's like these funny threats here, like knight takes F4 with a discovery against the king. So king steps to the side, D takes, B takes, knight D1, and we got Queen E7, knight FD2, bishop D7. Okay, so now have to be wary of these sacrifices. So black here is better. This is a good position for black. Knight C3, F3, Queen D2, check, Knight G5. He just keeps bringing more pieces toward the white king. F takes G2, King takes G2, Rook comes in, F3. And here, Sokolov plays a natural move. Perhaps he had to play King H1 here, but he plays Rook E3, which looks totally respectable. But after Rook A2, exclamation mark, drawing the queen away from the defense of the E3 rook, Rook takes E3. And then Sokolov played Bishop takes E3. There's really no defense here at this point. For instance, let's say Queen D2, then just Bishop takes H3 check. And if Knight takes H3, Rook G3 check. And let's say King F2, then just E4. And then followed by E5. So this is why we see this desperado move. Bishop takes G6. Agdasine just ignores it. Plays Rook G3, King H1, then takes. So basically, there's a 45-minute game, so a rapid game, but nevertheless a crushing defeat in this particular line by Sokolov. Not that he played it good, but you know, 226, 2 Grandmasters 2600. You know, it's pretty convincing, even in game 45. So after this, 1997, Sokolov goes back to his original, and hope you're still with me for the ride because we went through a lot of games so far, but now Sokolov is back with his original, recipe against the Dutch, so to speak, and plays Knight C3. This is against the Spanish Grandmaster Miguel Ilescas, who at the time in 1997 was 2635, so he was about 20 points higher rated than Sokolov. So Knight C3 is back. Knight F6, Bishop G5, D5, and F3. Again with the real basic ideas of playing E4, but not only playing E4, because sometimes E3 is played, but it contests the E4 square. It keeps black out. And then sometimes G4 can be played, but definitely Queen D2 is prepared because Now it can play queen d2 without worrying about coming in here. And then, of course, white wants to castle queenside. So it's definitely an attacking system. So let's see how this game went. So knight c6, queen d2, g6, castle, bishop g7, bishop h6. Real straight up beginner chess. Get rid of the ghetto bishop and exploit the weak squares that remain. So castles, knight h3. And again, notice how white has not been eager just to play e4. It's more about controlling e4 than anything. Also, by holding this e pawn back, he can play e3. For instance, if black gets d5 e5 in, for instance, then he can have e3 here to reinforce if capture is taken. Or if e4, he can even close the position here. So it's a little more flexible. a6, bishop takes g7, king takes, knight f4. Queen d6, there's e3, bishop e6. And the idea, this isn't a common idea in the Dutch too, is to play bishop e6 and go to f7 or sometimes g8. h4. This is not just to solidify this knight here and protect from g5, but this is about attacking the king. Bishop f7, h5, g5, h6. It's an important move to be able to insert because you don't want black to be able to play g5 and then follow up with h6, because then it'll be harder to break the position open. With h6, it leaves this pawn still a little weak. Knight h3, g4, and knight g5. At this point, we got to give white the nod here because of all the weakness in black's position. White's position very, very solid, and it's going to be very hard for black to protect his, his king with those pawns like that. Bishop g6, knight e2, of course going to f4. There's e5, as I mentioned. Sokolov figures it's time to break open the position. Queen takes. There's knight f4. Rook a e8. So at least black is fully developed. He hasn't allowed his position, his position to fall behind in development. However, this Kingside is terribly weak. Meanwhile, he's attacking this pawn on e3. So bishop d3, Sokolov just gives it up and goes into an endgame. Queen takes, rook takes, and now knight f6, attacking c7 and this rook here. Let's decides it's not worth it. So simply attacks the knight. F takes g4. Knight takes g4. And now knight c7. Rook 8 e5. Knight f3. Knight f2. Knight takes. Rook takes. Rook h e1. Knight takes. King d1. Rook takes. King takes e1, and now we're in the endgame where white has a better pawn structure. King f2, knight g8, knight d5, and now we see that white's advantage is becoming more clear. King g3, bishop f7, knight e3, bishop takes a2. And a nice intermediate move from Sokolov, just locking the bishop out. And now knight g4. Let's get best chance to try to play a5 and try to release this bishop. So maybe at the a5, king f4, king g7. Like c4, a4, something along these lines. Even though white is still better. Instead, after b3, knight g4, and one of the ideas is after, say, a routine move like knight takes g4, f takes g4, king takes g4. It's still tremendously in white's favor because his bishop still has no way to get into the game. However, the knight g4, Sokolov found an even better idea, which was simply to play knight d5, then after knight e5, play bishop takes f. This, just being patient, but his idea is just to attack the bishop, which is bound up on these two squares. So either bring the knight here, I'm sorry, or just bringing the knight here rather. Real simple idea. So at the knight d5, knight e5 is played. Of course, the idea is just to play here, which would, set the bishop free on a2. This is why bishop takes f5, knight c6, and now the knight has to protect the bishop. So knight c3, knight b4. What this does, unfortunately for black, is tie up all of his pieces. So now the king can just march. King e3, king d2, bishop c8, just attacking the pawns, and black just does not have enough time to protect everything. And king c1, and that's all she wrote. The next move was going to be king b2. So good game by Sokolov, returning to the system with knight c3, knight f6, and bishop g5. Okay, let me just save that. Okay. Okay, another Dutch specialist, Dimitri Rinderman. You might have one of his books on the Dutch. This game is from Rotterdam, Netherlands Championship. Excuse me, it's early this morning. Netherlands Championship, 1998. D4 F5, and we see this system: G3, Knight F6, Bishop G2. And if you've been following the video, when Sokolov plays this system, he usually plays this move, C3. Okay, so basically you're seeing two kind of systems so far with Sokolov versus the Dutch. Either he plays knight c3 and these bishop g5 type systems, or he plays g3 but then he plays c3 with the idea of putting the queen on b3, and they'll put his knight on h3 to keep the bishop's diagonal open. And this is what happened here. Again, this crosses one of black's main ideas, which is to be able to play d6 and e5. Knight d2. And now Reinemann plays d6. In the other game where we saw this, the black player had played the move d5, which left the e5 square weak. Here's a little more. This is a little more akin to a classical Dutch where black holds back these pawns. It's a little more conservative. However, it gives white more freedom to play in the center, which he does. Plays e4 here. After f takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes b takes. Now you have target right here for black to defend. So he plays d5. Bishop goes back, and now he plays the move e5. Now this is very, very important position here. If, right, you try to get greedy and play D takes, let's say D takes, knight takes E5, and bishop takes D5, that loses. Just the bishop takes H3. That's one of the downsides of the knight being on H3. So you have to be careful of little, um, little tactical nuances like that. However, instead of that move, you play bishop G5, completing your development and then preparing to castle the next move. And black is already in trouble in this position. Sokolov just castled. It's a good move. E4 is nothing to be worried about. If black could get away with E4, then black would be just fine. The problem is the center is not stable enough. Can't be stabilized quick enough. So at the F3, how do you hold the center? It's too many breaks. No way to defend the center. So for instance, bishop F5, then you just take. If you took here, then queen takes B7. The position just crumbles. This is why Sokolov could just relax and castle. So queen D6, rook E1, just putting more pressure on the pawns. Bishop takes H3, bishop takes H3, castle. And the idea behind that was just to keep move the bishop off this line so that the D5 pawn wouldn't get captured. But now the pressure comes back. Bishop G2, E takes D4. Nice in between move, just ignoring bishop F4. And rook takes F4. Good idea, just not enough. And it was shows the desperation. For instance, if queen c5, then then white could just go into this ending. Okay, and this is just terrible for black. So back to reality. So rook takes f4. Decided it's time to give up the exchange. G takes f4. Rook d8. Rook a d1. And what I like about this game is just the simplicity of white's play. And it seemed like just with this simple moves that he just kind of like just overwhelmed his opponent. Again, there's a weakness cropping up on the c file, which is a common theme, especially when knight c6 is played in the before the c pawn is moved. So knight d4, and it's just too many tactics in the position. Rook takes d7, rook takes c7, queen takes f4, and now just simply queen a3, getting ready to make plans on invading the 7th rank. King g8, rook takes g7, king takes d7, queen e7 check, dropping the rook on d8, and after king h6, queen d8, guess what? Black resigned. 26 move. So we see so far we are crystallizing the systems that Sokolov likes to play against the Dutch. Of course, he's lost a few games, drew a few games, but we see some good victories at the same time. So you have this to choose from, right, with a relatively simple plan, and you had the more direct knight c3 plan to choose from. Let's keep going, children. Again, another top grandmaster with the black pieces, Predrag Nikolic. This took place in 1998 at the Netherlands Championship also. Against Nikolic, who was also a Dutch specialist. he employed his knight c3 again. Recommended d5 is played. And now we see bishop g5. And sometimes Sokolov only plays bishop g5 after the knight has committed himself. c6, same idea that we saw before. Just vacating the queen and probing the black queen side. e3, queen b6. Matter of fact, we saw black defeat white in this line. So queen b6, and this time rook b1. He decides to protect the pawn. Knight d7, and we can see some of the downside of committing the bishop so early, because now you have to ask yourself, why is the bishop on g5? Bishop d3, g6, h4, bishop g7, h5, h6. And so, to me, the bishop experiment, I mean, putting the bishop there on g5 is that early is a little bit, I'm not gonna say dubious, but it's a little bit shady to me, because again, black just pretty much ignored it and then was able to knock the bishop around. The downside for black is, yes, he's weakened his queen side somewhat. Excuse me, his king side somewhat. But if white can't really exploit it, then he's just basically gaining space, at the expense of the bishop. So bishop h2, there's e5. So we see black just getting everything he wants out of the opening, and he's equalized, of course. Notice e5 is played. He's willing to part with the f pawn, which is totally good for black. E takes d4, e takes d4, and he's down a pawn here, but he just has full compensation. Knight e7. Now bishop takes d4, queen d2, bishop g7, bishop g6. That leaves to some problems for black. Getting caught out there in the middle of the board like that. This is why, same thing after queen d4, bishop g6. This is why Nikolic is not eager just to grab the pawn right away, but he just keeps developing. So knight e7, queen e2. Now he takes the pawn. Queen takes d4, but of course there's tempo now that he must give up. Queen f6, bishop e6, and Sokolov tries to make it difficult for black, but black, just skillfully deals with the threats. And eventually he's able, he just equalizes here. And this game ended in the draw after queen c8. Okay, so we see strong grandmaster dealing with this this system right here, but not without a little bit of drama. Again, then later on in the year, he played Nikolic again. And Nikolic here is rated 2640, Sokolov 2620. Sokolov has the white pieces, knight c3, d5, and now here's a switch. Sokolov opts for bishop f4. And I think he probably came to the idea that, hey, putting the bishop on g5 is a tad premature, and I think he learned something from that game, that it's better to wait until the knight has committed itself to f6 before putting the bishop on g5. So he puts the bishop on f4, c6, and Predrag, it's kind of, allowing for the same opportunities by playing c6, bringing the queen out here, etc. So e3, knight f6, bishop d3, e6, knight f3. Again, Predrag Nikolic, I think that's how you say it. Nikolic is a Stonewall specialist. Cause so you have Dutch specialists, but they might concentrate on one aspect of the Dutch. Like Maliniuk is a Leningrad Dutch specialist. That's pretty much all he plays. And Nikolic played a lot of Stonewall. So Bishop E7, Castle, Knight BD7, Knight E2, Castle, H3, jumps in to E4, C4. And there's a typical attack by white on the queen side, and black is gonna attack on the king side, just like all traditional Stonewalls. So queen E7, queen B3, G5, bishop H2, H5, bishop takes, F takes, knight D2, bishop G7, getting out of the way of the rook and also preparing to further advance of the pawns. F3, E takes F3, knight takes, G4. Good energetic play by black, not really allowing white to gain the initiative on the queen side. Bishop takes, D takes, queen G7, queen C3, and now we see this maneuver to get this bishop into the game, but first the rook has to be released. So rook F1, rook F8 just in time. Queen H7, queen D4, queen B1, queen takes, queen C2, and knight D4. And usually in this line, you get this knight versus bishop ending, a good knight versus bad bishop ending. But here, Nikolic is able to keep everything under control, and the game wind up being a draw at the 42 moves. Notice that white's bishop never really, black's light square bishop never really became much in this game. It's always a problem in the Stonewall, a light square bishop. But this game, Nikolic was able to draw. But of note was the transition of Sokolov from this move to this move. So that lets you know something about his thinking process. And I think it was really this last game with Nikolic where he played this, and then the bishop kind of got harassed on the king side over here, that caused them to switch it up. Again, in the Netherlands Championship, this isn't 2000 though. Sokolov with the white pieces is playing a playing from the Netherlands named Clip, who was a master 2330. And knight C3, D5, again, bishop F4 now. Again, not bishop G5 anymore. C6, E3, knight F6, bishop D3, E6, knight F3, bishop E7, castles, knight E2, bishop D7, and the idea with this knight E2 right here, of course, is to make way to make one of the important breaks to C4. Decide white has to decide which side of the board he's going to play on or where he's going to play, and in these closed positions, it's important to find breaks for your rooks. So bishop D7, C4, bishop E8. There's this Botvinnik move I was telling you about, Botvinnik maneuver, to play this move, sometimes this, and sometimes that. But basically, it's a time-consuming maneuver just to get this guy into play. So bishop E8, queen B3, and now B6. And that's a consequence of moving this bishop away. Now, the thing is if you were going to play B6, then it would have made sense just to leave this bishop here. So this is a strategical misstep here. So instead of playing b6, if you probably want to play a move like maybe even queen c8, because now b6 is more of a weakness than anything. So b6, rook ac1, and this fits in with white strategy. Of course, he's going to open up the c file eventually, and along with this bishop, rook here be able to invade if black is not careful. Knight e4, h3, c5. This leads to weakness for white. So error, c takes d5, e takes d5, and now you have this isolated pawn situation. D takes, b takes c5. First we had the hanging pawns. It's very difficult in this position to maintain, because you need an attack if you're going to have hanging pawns. Just having hanging pawns with no attack is just suicide. So bishop f7, knight e5, queen b6, knight takes f7. This forces queen b3, knight h6, nice in between move, just destroying the black pawn structure. A takes b3, knight c6, bishop takes, rook f7, f3, booting the knight out, knight g5, knight f4, knight d8, and then just simply knight takes d5. This was just a demolition. I mean, there was like about 300 rating points different. Sokolov was 2637, but this player is still a master at 2330. So it's an impressive victory. A lot of positional errors made by black here. White didn't really have to do too much. Black kind of just handed the game over with these moves in the center, the c5, the b6, c5, and that kind of set the table right there for black. Excuse me, for white. So again, we see this system from Sokolov. Not as aggressive as before. The early times we saw him playing, and we saw the queen side castling, an attack on the king side. This game is from 2002 against a player named Bachofner, 2327. Same thing again, bishop f4, c6, e3, knight f6, bishop d3, g6, knight f3, bishop g7. So we can see this system is pretty easy to remember. Also, the piece placement is very natural for white. And we see the king side attack now. h4, bishop e6, h5, willing to sacrifice on knight bd7. This is actually an error here after rook takes h5, g takes, and knight to g5, attacking this guy right here and threatening queen to h5. So after knight bd7, knight e2, and we see the same plans here. Now here, Sokolov, instead of playing knight e2, put more pressure on the opponent by playing a move like knight g5 or h6, which is a logical follow-up to such aggressive actions. So these two moves are better. Instead, knight e2 was played. Bishop came back to f7. Knight g5. And now here, knight takes h5 is somewhat possible here. Although after knight takes h5, rook takes. G takes, bishop takes. White will have a lesser advantage than before. After say knight f6. All right, so knight e4 was played. So bishop f7, knight g5, knight e4. Knight takes f7. This displaces the king. King takes f7, f3, knight ef6, h6, and now white has a big advantage. I mean, black's pieces are totally tied up right now. Again, that old adage, if one piece stands bad, if one piece stands bad, the whole game stands bad. This applies here. I mean, look at the rook on h8, bishop on f8. Everything is just just a mess. And now the position is going to be open, and black can't do anything about it. That's the bad side of playing those static positions. You play d5, f5, c6, because once the breakthrough is there, there's no flexibility. If you can't stop the breakthrough and you're not prepared to, have counterplay or whatever, then it's just, you just get executed. So right here is an example of that. You got these pawns on d5 and f5. This Stonewall, which is designed to stop or control e4. Black is way behind. Black is behind in development. The king is exposed, and he can't do anything to stop the opening of the position. So castles, and we can see the rook lined up with the king. So king e8, bishop g5, bishop e7, knight f4, attacking the e6 pawns, c5, d5, e takes, knight takes, queen takes d5, bishop g5, bishop a4, c4 check, king h1, queen c7, and then devastating move, rook a d1, just piling up. There's nothing that white can do. That black can do. If he tries to play rook d8, then he just gets mated after queen f7. So he just resigned. So there's another victory for this system right here. And we saw another feature with this kingside attack. Whereas before we saw this idea with white playing more conservatively on the queen side. As in this game right here. You see white castled in h3, but again here black created a lot of pawn weaknesses. And here we see same devastating game, but just with the different strategy of attacking on the king side. White didn't castle that game until late, move 18. Just simply blasted open the center and attacked the exposed king. Here's another game. This is an unknown player, so I don't know if this player was like lower rated than the master or what, but here's another example. So now we see the last couple of games we saw d5, which is the main line here, and Sokolov responded to bishop f4. Remember I said before that he wasn't really that he shouldn't play, that he stopped playing bishop to g5 because it seemed premature without the knight being there. Here, the player plays knight f6 first, and now he plays bishop g5. So now there's some justification here. So there's an actual target. So now d5, and we see f3. And again, I explained to you that f3, because a lot of players, they play f3 and then they want to play e4 right away. It's not always that straightforward. Sometimes you want to play e3. Yes, you want to control e4 and then eventually play e4, but sometimes it's down the road, maybe even in the end game. You don't always want to just throw e4 right away, right, and blow up the position. Sometimes you just want to establish control over the square. Remember, Black's main idea with this setup is d5, f5, and knight f6 is to control e4. So with f3, you just kind of like shut down the whole idea. Of course, the downside is that you can't play your knight to its most natural square. All right, so it has its pros and cons. All right, you can play knight to h3. You can play knight to f4. Okay, so knight c6 again. Strong design to play e5 there, and this is again why e3, the possibility of playing e3 is important. Queen d2, e6. Again, we see this idea here of castle and queenside. Knight h3, bishop e7, and knight f4. Castle, e3, a6, and there it is. The black king has defined where it's going to be, and now white starts attacking. Queen e8, h5. Little tactical shot here, knight e4, but this is in white's favor. F takes e4, bishop takes g5, and now he just plays e5. Now, I think e takes d5 is pretty good. An idea here is if e takes d5, of course, knight c takes d5. That's better for white. Another idea is just e5 here, and perhaps d takes, knight takes, and castle. And white has a decent position there too. So, however, Sokolov decides to keep the position closed and plays e5. And this is understandable because he has this plan, perhaps castle and queenside, and then a break is real easy here. The g4, it's really hard for black to be able to stop this break, opening up the g file, and then just bring the rooks over here. Then also maybe having the bishop here on d3, supporting that. So he figured he'd close the position and then just attack down the h and g files. Let's see what happened. Bishop h6, a3, bishop d7. Again, this always comes up in these positions. Bishop d3, rook c8, and now we see this long-winded plan of moves like knight d8, c5, and all this stuff takes time. Getting this bishop in the game. So it's knight c2, knight ce2, and there's two breaks here for for white. One is c4, and the other is g4. So depending on what you want to do, whether you want to play in the king side for an attack or you want to play on the queen side, it's your choice. You choose. But the way Sokolov organizes game here is that he is flexible. He can go on either side. He can either play, if he wanted to, move like c3 or something like that, and just keep his d4 square strengthened. So knight d8. So he decides to play for the c4 break. So now, to me, black should challenge white in the center and play c5. It only makes sense. After c6, c5, black has no counterplay. And his pieces have no meaning. Like, why put the rook on c8 and then allow the file to get closed? Look what happened to this knight and bishop. So, again, now look what happens. Remember I was telling you about the breaks. So now knight f7. This break is done, but there's another break here, which is way up at b5. But that's not even on White's radar. To try to organize this break with the A4, B4, B5, Rook B1, etc. That's not even on the radar. That's like a something that you would consider like in the end game at this point. Here, the most realistic break is G4. With the position pretty much locked up on the queen side, it's easy to have the plan of castle and queen side, bring this rook to the G file, and then push this pawn and crack open the position. So G4, knight G5, castle, F takes G4, queen C2, attacking this, queen E7. There it is, rook D to G1, rook B8. Again, all this stuff is too slow. Rook here, rook here, rook here, blah, blah, blah. It's too slow. Rook B8, rook takes, B6, rook H to G1, B takes E5, and now Sokolov plays an excellent move. He just simply paused with the exchange. Rook takes G5. And of course, the idea here is if bishop takes G5, then just bishop takes G7 check. And on king H8, there's a fork here. Winning the queen. So this was the idea behind it. So bishop takes G5 again. Bishop takes H7. And if it goes the other way, then it will be mate after queen G6. This is why rook takes G5 is so powerful. Black decides to give back the exchange, plays rook takes S4. Bishop takes H7. King takes. Queen G6 check. King F8. E takes F4. Bishop takes G5. And now F takes G5. And black is just busted. Bishop E8. Rook F1 check. Bishop F7. And then H6. No way to stop all the threats of H takes G7 and etc. Again, that was a terrible game by black. Good logical game by white. Again, illustrating this idea of knight c3, and we see the return of bishop g5, but only when the knight commits itself to f6 first. If d5 is played, then Sokolov plays bishop to f4. Let's keep going. Again, another Dutch specialist. This is in 2005. This is the Polish Championship. Sokolov rated 2662 versus Mateusz Bartel, who's 2511. Again, another known specialist in the Dutch. There it is, knight c3, d5, and what is Sokolov going to play? You should know by now, not bishop g5, but bishop f4, a6, dual purpose move. Of course, it prevents knight c3 going to b5, but also in some cases later on we'll prepare b5, c5 this counterattack on the queen side. Knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, bishop e2, c5, and castle. So we see here against another fellow strong grandmaster, the castling on the queen side, playing more conservative, so to speak. There's another thing too, is that with this early move a6, that if you it kind of discourages you from castling queen side a little bit, because a6 already is preparing b5. If you play queen d2 castle, for instance, this is already cooking and ready to go. So castle, knight c6, knight a4. So we see more positional play from Sokolov. c4, b3, and now we see the attack against the pawns on the queen side. Bishop e7, knight into e5, knight takes e5, d takes, knight e4, queen d4, and we see this tremendous battle now for the c5 square. Queen a5, f3, knight c5. Of course, white doesn't want to play knight takes c5. So instead he plays knight b2, knight b2 with the idea taken right here. And now g5, common theme in the Dutch, trying to exploit, argue that the bishop is developed there too early and turn it into a liability for white. Bishop g3, knight d7, b takes c4, and now bishop c5. So the game is pretty much up for grabs here. Queen d3. I mean, if you're a Dutch player, you should be happy with a position like this. Bishop f2, knight takes e5, queen b3. So a lot of tactics, pins, etc. flying around. F takes, bishop takes e3, and now d4. Bishop f2, bishop d7, and now black wants to try to complete his development. But he parts ways with this pawn. Perhaps castle here was more prudent, and instead of just giving up this pawn. Instead, bishop d7, queen takes b7, and castle. And perhaps black figured that he would have some compensation, and this queen being on the same file with this knight here. But after queen e4, bishop e7, it's a problem because at the queen e4 is a tempo that's gained, an attack. So it's kind of like he just snatched the pawn for nothing. Bishop a7, and now bishop d4. So now black just dropped material. So black just dropped 2 pawns just like that and is lost. So this move was basically a one-move blunder, bishop d7. Better for black is just a castle. And now, to me, black's position looks kind of loose here, and I would still say white is better because of those pawns around the king and in the center. Just everything looks kind of random, on the king side and the center for black, where white has some problems with the pawns on the queen side, but still a little more together. So after this move, bishop d7, which I say is a blunder, queen e4 just kind of refutes any idea there. Bishop takes, dropping another pawn, and then black tries to rely on tactics, depending on some type of pin here. And of course, if bishop takes here, then simply rook takes a7, and white is still winning. However, Sokolov just simply develops another piece, plays rook a d1, introduces more threats into the position, because after the removal of this knight, then you got to worry about this guy. So, knight g6 is played. King h1, getting out of the pin. This forces black to do something. Bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, d4. What did he force black to do? Force black to go into a losing endgame, 2 pawns down. Rook a b8, knight d3, knight c5, and after bishop takes c2, rook d2, bishop b1. This is good ending right here. Just knight d7 with the fork. So that was the idea of that combination in case you didn't see it. So first you see the bishop on d7 is threatened. Bishop goes to a4, trying to recover some material. Knight c5, hitting the bishop. The bishop goes to c2. The rook drops back, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to b1. And then knight d7 with this fork. It's another victory against a strong grandmaster for this system right here. Again, so years later, we see Sokolov. This is 2007, a rapid game, and we see Sokolov facing Millennia again, who was again probably the most renowned Dutch expert in the world today. And this time, in the rematch, Sokolov plays knight c3. Although the first time they played, um, Sokolov opted for the main line with g3 and wind up going into like a sideline with c3 and queen b3. Here, he's sticking to his guns and plays knight c3. After knight f6, then bishop g5, d5, e3, e6, knight f3, c5. And what I, after going through these games, what I want to share with you that I picked up from Sokolov's games is that he enjoys playing against these Stonewall type structures. That even when black tries to go into a Leningrad system, he kind of forces or attempts to force black into playing this type of structure. It's something that he likes about playing against this type of structure. For example, after d4, f5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, g6, c3, bishop g7, and then he plays these type of structures. Notice the castling can't be played. He wants to provoke black into playing systems like, say, e6. He'll play knight f3 and say castles. Then you see a lot of this type of stuff. d5. Of course, we gotta throw that bishop there. And then again, from the Leningrad, we see black is kind of prodded into going into this Stonewall type structure where Sokolov enjoys this position. Just something, just an observation. So let's get back to the game. So again, e6, knight f3, and c5 here attacking the center. Bishop e2, knight c6, castle. You can't complain about black's position here. a6. It's with the idea of queenside expansion. So what can white do here really to put the brakes on black's plans? Put some pressure there. Well, he plays a4. Excuse me, knight a4, attacking this pawn. Black has a choice either to play c takes d4 or c4. So c4 is played, and now knight e4. Excuse me, knight e5. Bishop e7. Now black probably could have put a little more pressure, maybe playing bishop d6 or something like that. But it's kind of annoying having this pin here like that. So he obviously wants to break that. Bishop e7. And Sokolov played knight takes c6. B takes c6. And then b3. Putting pressure on the queen side pawns. Queen e5. And now he plays the move c3. Now c3 has the idea of eventually playing the move b4. But Melanik crosses the plan up and plays c takes b3, a takes b3, which now, of course, gives white a nice target here on the a file. So what's real nice about this is how the way Sokolov is organizing this game is that he always has kind of like two ways he can go. It's like if plan A is not gets shut down, then he has the other plan ready to go. So here Right after queen a5, c3. Okay, he's setting up for b4 here. But, he's setting up for, moves like b4 himself. Or even if he wants b takes c4, doubling these pawns up. So now Malinik says, oh, I gotta stop that plan. But when he stops that plan, now a new problem arises, which is this pawn on a6. Castle and b4. Okay, now why b4? It keeps this pawn weak. Keeps this pawn weak. Okay, this holds him up. Queen c7, and of course, now Malinik wants to simply play b5 and relieve the situation. So keep in mind the strategy that's going on. Bishop f8, bishop f4 attacking the queen. Queen d8. Knight c5. Attacking this target here. You got the bishop here, knight here, and the rook. Malinik jumps in, plays knight e4, attacking this pawn. Okay, so he takes the pressure off here, but he creates a little bit of pawn weakness. So f takes e4, and now rook a5. Again, making sure this pawn cannot advance. Bishop b7. Again, we talked about this problem with this bishop always, not really having a place to go. f3. Rook takes f3. Queen d7. Bishop d3. This improving the bishop. Queen c2, threatening to take on h7, provoking some weakness out of black. Queen f2, bishop takes, e takes. Another great move by Sokolov, because now you have this weakness and this weakness, right? There's your principle of two weaknesses. So now black has to defend on two fronts. So rook f6, bishop to b1. Why bishop b1? Well, this allows white to attack black on the king side more effectively by putting the queen in front of the bishop. So this weakness right now is not enough. So white has to create other weaknesses in order to create a situation where black is overworked. So he has this held up right now, but he needs to do more. So this is what he's doing. So at the rook a8, rook af8, queen c2. Of course, wanting to play checkmate. Not checkmate, but check. So g5, f takes g5, h takes g5, rook takes f6, rook takes f6. Queen d2. And again, there's this, more weaknesses. So now you got this to worry about as black, as well as the one you had before. Queen d7, bishop d3. So notice now he jumps back on the first weakness. a6, e5, bishop takes, bishop takes. So mission accomplished. And here's black, of course, wanting to create this counterplay by having the threat of this pawn hanging over white's head. Queen e3, king h7, h3. Again, fixing this guy from moving. Again, fixing the weakness. At the same time, it also creates a little safety for any back rank attempts. But primarily, it's to fix this guy from really doing anything. So, for instance, whoops, sorry about that. So, for instance, a move like g4 It just be met by queen g3. So after h3, king g6, queen b3, rook a1, queen e5, queen f7. And here, Sokolov plays c4, okay? But a real strong move is simply rook a6. I'm sorry, not I said rook a6 and then play rook a7. Sorry about that. Because rook a7 is met by rook f1, king h2, and then queen takes f7. That's a mistake. I said rook a6 will play rook f7. I meant to play rook a6. There you go. Now rook a6. Again, focusing on this, and then now here, king h2, and let's just say queen f4. Play could go like this: rook e6, rook c1, and then already, let's see, rook takes c3. White has to be very careful of these pawns here. So Sokolov opts for c4 with the idea of just breaking these pawns up. Rook e6, queen h8, king g6, rook a8, natural move, queen h7, and now this causes black to go downhill. Rook g8, king h6, takes, and then drops another pawn, which is crucial. And now notice how these black pawns are broken up and don't have the power that they had in the other variations. And black just simply loses the game. That one pawn is all it takes. So that's Sokolov's second victory over the Dutch specialist. A very hard fought game using this system once again. There's another game. Player named Tavoularis, 2246. Sokolov with the white pieces. Again, you see this system at work, and here Sokolov decides to just simply trade off. And he plays this system again, which is very similar to the Trumpovsky. And this guy's a master player, but Sokolov just kind of overwhelms him. Gains a pawn, quickly transitions to an ending, and Sokolov went on to win this game quite easily. There's really nothing to say about this game except that Black lost a pawn real quick, and then trying to go for some type of tactic. Well, he basically sacrificed his pawn trying to go for some tactics, probably figuring, hey, I got this lead in development. I'll open up the position real quick. But then nothing, there's nothing there. I'll just show you them moves real quick. And basically, White started winning material and just nursed home his advantage. Easy work. Okay, here's Dimitri Reinerman again. This is 2012 again in the Netherlands Championship. And again, Reinerman is Dutch specialist, and these are guys that you can look in the database and you see a lot of games from them in the Dutch defense, and they write books on the defense. So you know that in other words, this system that Sokolov is playing is not just a like a gimmicky system or just like a one-off system. This is a system that you can play in all your tournament games if you want. If you're looking for something to play against the Dutch, it's real easy, and I gave you two systems that he plays. Like I said, the one system was the G3 C3 line followed by Queen B3, but Sokolov gave that up, stopped playing that. But you can still play it, and the system that he's been playing, as you see by the progress of this video, is basically knight c3, d4, f5, knight c3. If knight f6, then bishop g5. If knight doesn't appear on f6, you don't play bishop g5, you play bishop f4. Okay, you don't want to prematurely commit the bishop to g5. So that's basically it. Sometimes you'll castle queenside, but a lot of times you'll just simply castle on the king side. And then other times you won't not castle. Depends if your opponent initiates an early fianchetto. It's the time you play h4, h5, and start attacking in that manner. Here's a game against Rinderman, round 2, against in the Netherlands Championship. So knight f6, bishop g5, d5, e3, e6, knight f3, bishop e7, bishop d3, castles, and we can see when Sokolov is playing a real strong grandmasters, he adopts super solid approach. b6, again, always dealing with this problem, bishop, like what to do with it. Knight e2, we've seen this maneuver, knight e2, many times. Often is to play the move c4. Remember, it's important to know where your breaks are at. Once b6 is played, there's a certain static weakness that appears around the light squares. And so it's natural to want to play c4, rook c1, and then pile up against this. So it's a plan that we see over and over again from Sokolov. So h6, bishop h4, there's c5, and now c4. Knight c6, a3, and g5, bishop g3, knight to e4, knight to e5, bishop b7. So we see a lot of tension in the position. Finally, Sokolov exchanges, plays c takes d4, e takes d4, e takes d5, and now c takes d5, e takes d5. So we see white inflicting his weakness of this isolated pawn. And it's real double-edged for black. I mean, he's pushed these pawns forward. So it's kind of like they could become liabilities in the endgame, or they can become good space gainers, depending on what transpires. Knight c6, bishop takes c6, and bishop e5. So just gets rid of the knight so he can establish a piece on e5. And the only way to get rid of it is to initiate more trades, which would be favorable for white. Queen d7, f3, booting the knight out. Knight g3, knight c4, now f4. So now it's kind of like to get rid of this bishop. Now you got to give white a pass pawn. Reindemann played queen e6. The idea here is that if knight takes e3, going for this fork, then queen h5. And the weaknesses around the king don't allow black to play knight takes f1 because of queen g6 mate. This shows you how weak the protection around the black king is, that he could just get mated, like that. So on queen h5, the move queen e6 would have to be played, guarding against that, of course. And now rook fe1. C takes d4, bishop would take, and now you had this pin here and here. And let's say, for example, g takes f4, and now the position starts falling apart. Now you have knight takes, again adding more pressure here. Bishop g5, queen f3, bishop b5, and knight takes h6, bishop takes, and bishop takes, bishop on b5. Alright, so back to the position. So this is why knight takes e3 was skipped by black. So instead f4, queen e6, and that deals with, this idea. Queen e2 now. So now the pawns saved. Rook f7, and typical Dutch idea, lining up on the f file and opening the F file. So it's kind of dubious to line up on this file if you can't get it open. So F takes G5, bishop takes G5, knight takes, D takes, and rook AF8. So now, once the file is open, then he lines up here. However, at the H4, where's the bishop going? Bishop D8, Queen H5, with this obvious threat right here, again exploiting the weaknesses. Kingside, Rook H7 is forced, and the thing is, once you start having bad pieces, it's like a domino effect. Then, one piece becomes bad in order to take up the defense of a weakened pawn or something, and then this other tactics come into play. For example, here, this move wins right on the spot, knight d4. With this threat, bishop takes here and knight here. In the game, another strong move was played, which was knight d6, which is also winning. Again, with this discovered attack, rook takes, rook g7, and then this bishop f5 hitting the queen. And then this knocks the queen away from the defense of h6. So after queen e7, and this queen takes h6, and then of course if queen takes e5, then bishop h7 will win this queen. Whoops, let me do that. So impressive win. Only 28 moves with this system by Sokolov. This is 2013 Reykjavik Open. Sokolov versus a player named Haraldsson, who was only rated, well, I'll say only in comparison to Sokolov, who was rated 2644. Haraldsson was rated 2028. So in the United States, that would be a expert player. Somebody over 2,000 is an expert. Again, just same idea, right? In 82, you already know what's coming. C4. These are the breaks. C4 and G4, but the G4 break is harder to achieve and gives black more counterplay. With C4 is more natural, easier to achieve, and gives black less counterplay. Knight B7, C4, knight E4, H3, Queen E8, Bishop H2, G5, Knight E5, Knight takes, Bishop takes, Queen G6, F3, Queen C2, Queen H6, and Rook E1. It's interesting to see how Sokolov deals with black's aggressive chances. And again, problem Bishop, what to do with it. Knight comes back to C3. Rook A8. A3. Remember, this bishop stands bad. And of course, A3 is setting up B4. Because a lot of this play is similar to Queen's Gambit declines position. You have this structure. And you could get B4, B5, trade off, etc. Attacking on the C file. That's what you want to do. Rook F7. Of course, black is trying to organize attack on the king side. C takes D5. Knight takes d5, e4. So just striking in the center. Again, this is one of those examples of being flexible. Now, if c takes d5, if he just took like that, then of course the e4 break wouldn't um, happen. You could just play bishop takes f5 because the pawn will be hanging. Or you could play a move like queen b3, attacking that pawn. So this is why you don't see that move. On the other hand, if c takes d5, which maybe is a little more natural, then you could play queen b3, again attacking that pawn, which will force this bad piece to become probably even worse. You play moves like that, knight b5, and you just keep probing, keep provoking on the on those weaknesses. So for example, say you're thirsty to defend the pawn, you play a6, and there's a couple of moves you can play. You can play a move like knight d6. You play knight a7, getting rid of this guy, right? Threatening bishop takes h6. So a lot of play there on the queen side. So notice the strategy. What's the strategy here? Black's trying to attack on the king side, white attacking on the queen side. But white, since the king side attack is always more serious than the queen side attack, white takes measures to make sure e4 is under control, and also that black's king side attack doesn't get out of hand. So he attacks in the center, knight takes d5. Now the downside of knight takes d5 is that it takes away black's influence on e4, and now at the right time, boom. And any kind of central thrust like that is going to distract black from being able to go through with the king side assault. Knight takes c3, queen takes c3, f4, and that's a hurtful move to have to make because again it's kind of close up the position. Black needs the position to be open over here. b4, queen f8, bishop c4, just finding some kind of weakness and latching onto it. Bishop f6, bishop takes, and now d5 again, blowing up the center, and black is ill-equipped to deal with this central attack because he's concentrated on the king side. And now that this king side attack is stalled, he's kind of in trouble because his pieces are not in place to deal with this central conflict. So queen g7, this e5, rook f7, d6, just rolling over the player. h5, and this is like a little bit too late. Rook e4, king h7, a4, a6, bishop e2, king h6, queen c5, rook f5, rook e1, rook g8, bishop d1, bishop e8, queen d4, queen d7, queen c4, rook f8, and bishop b3. And black just resigned. I mean, he's under tremendous pressure in the position. And again, I'm not skipping, results. I'm not just trying to show you all wins. Like, I think there's been, 4 or 5 wins in a row. That's exactly what's happening. This is in 2013 against Dublin Narciso, Grandmaster, rated 2551. I think it's M Narciso Dublin. That's what I think it is, or M Dublin Narciso, rated 2551 with the black pieces. Knight c3. Again, once the knight commits itself on f6, bishop g5, d5, e3, E6, knight F3, and again, there's no need to even explain some of these moves anymore. You already know. See the idea here. C4. Black strikes on the queen side first. C4. C C takes D4. E takes D4. So this is the first time we see here black actually inflicted white with the isolated pawn. Knight C6. Knight E4. Bishop takes. Queen takes. And then rook C1. Rook D8. Rook E1. Queen to B4. Queen C2. A3. And now white plays C5. It's interesting. It reminds me of Alekhine defense a little bit with this C5 idea, and sometimes you get B4, A4, A5. B4. A takes B4, A takes B4, and then B5, and these in the endings. You have to be very careful. Queen C7, Bishop B5, Knight A7, and then A4 is very committal. I like Bishop A4 here. But A4, this piece is kind of out of play right here because he dare not take this bishop. Bishop D7 takes, and Knight E5. Rook E7, F3. And the problem in this position for black is that he has no play. White has all the play on the queen side, and there's no corresponding play from black. Usually black tries to get some kind of kingside play going. Where's the counter play from black? Knight C3, Knight C6, ouch, Knight B5, hitting the queen, and then this square is weak. Queen D8, avoiding the trade. Rook A6, Rook E3, Queen B8, Rook CE1, just piling up right here. Knight D8, why not jump into D6, G6, Queen F2, Knight E8. And the dark squares are just getting exploited right now. King F8, Knight B5, Knight C3. Again, now we have this situation of knight takes D5, Rook D7 now, Knight E5, Rook G7, and now knight takes D5, and G5 is played. The idea here is if E takes D5, Knight takes G6, check. Rook G takes G6, and then Rook takes E8, and mate is coming up shortly. Therefore, Knight takes D5, G5, Queen H5, E takes D5, Knight D7, Rook D7, Queen E8, check, King G7, Rook E7, check, Rook takes, Rook takes. That was it, mate, in short manner. That was a devastating game again against a strong Grandmaster. And very interesting game. I mean, black had no play whatsoever. I don't know why he had no counterplay. Like he chose certain moves to really limit what he could do. Kind of like went down, like resigned to his fate. Yeah, this is a killer position, especially after F3. This is a killer position for white. Real easy to play and everything. Let's pile up on E6. Get the knights in this square. It's just brutal. Brutality. Then of course, like I say, when the pieces are bad like that, the whole game is bad. And then the tactical blow is usually imminent. You just gotta have the tactical ability to see it. So you get them moves like that. All right. Now we're almost at the end, children. We're in 2016, and here's another. I think this is an international master, Vignir Stefansson, the black pieces, and now we see a throwback. Here we go. So all these years we've seen knight c3 successfully played, and Sokolov goes in his older age to the main line. So we see c4, and this is the old Dutch with d6. This is the classical Dutch, and this is a classical main line against it. It's b4. And just simply simply gaining a lot of space on the queen side. And we see white's plan here. They're just attacking these pawns, and this is funny because this pawn on b5 is very very annoying because it just holds this pawn hostage. I know some of y'all out there want to take that pawn, but it loses to queen d5. Fork. Gotta watch those tactics. Rook a c1, knight b6, rook c5, queen c3, and now you see the pile up on the c pawn. So the question is, whose play gets in first? White's playing the queen side or black's play on the king side? The answer is, in this game, queen side play of white. There goes a pawn. White is already in deep trouble. Excuse me, black is already in deep trouble here. And he just does a couple of desperate moves and gets checkmated. And 3 more moves. And I showed you that game real fast because, again, that's a big deviation because Sokolov never played that line like in his whole career. But I just want to, show you the games that he's played in the Dutch, and again show you what to play against this d6, this classical Dutch. So classical Dutch is not too bad. It's just a little on the slow side. You can even see here white sacrifices the pawn, and then he just gets everything back with interest. And notice also how white switches his attack from the king side over to the king side. Excuse me, from the queen side over to the king side. Then back again. Just playing across the board. He's playing on the king side, queen side, and the center. And that, my friends, is the end of Sokolov versus the Dutch defense. This was his last game that I have on my database. It's 2017 now, so I'm sure that he's played more games, but this is the last one that I came across. He played this main line, and he has an impressive record against the Dutch. So if you're looking for something to play against it, we could say that this is his main weapon is knight c3, and if knight f6, bishop g5, and then if the opponent does not commit to knight f6 early, he plays bishop f4. So anyway, that was a long video, so I'm tired of talking right now, but again, this video is awesome because you will learn this particular system. And if you're looking for somebody to follow and emulate against the Dutch and good attacking attacking player with D4, well, Ivan Sokolov is the man. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.